Somewhere in the Arizona desert, a mountain range rises like the broken teeth of a buried giant. The Superstition Mountains, a place where over 130 years, more than 100 people have vanished or died searching for a single mine that may not even exist. Somewhere in this jagged wilderness lies a fortune in gold, a treasure guarded by heat, snakes, and something far older than greed. This is the legend of the lost Dutchman mine, and it begins with a dying man's confession. East of Phoenix, Arizona, the Superstition Mountains dominate the landscape like an ancient curse carved in stone. The range stretches nearly 40 miles across the Sonoran Desert, its jagged ridges and hidden canyons forming a labyrinth that has claimed lives for centuries. The heat here is relentless. Summer temperatures routinely exceed 130 degrees Fahrenheit. The rocks themselves seem to absorb and radiate an infernal energy, turning the landscape into a furnace of stone and suffering. Water is almost non-existent. Those who venture unprepared into these mountains face death from dehydration within hours. Rattlesnakes, Gila monsters, and mountain lions patrol this domain. Each step carries the constant threat of a fatal encounter. Yet for over a century, men have come willingly to this hellscape, drawn by a legend whispered in saloons and around campfires. The legend speaks of a lost gold mine of immense wealth, hidden somewhere in those mountains by a German immigrant named Jacob Waltz. In the 1880s, Waltz was known throughout Arizona as the Dutchman, a prospector who spoke of a secret mine yielding vast quantities of gold. He claimed to have discovered it near a distinctive rock formation resembling a weary Dutchman's face, hidden in the Superstition Range. But Waltz never revealed the mine's exact location. He guarded its secret jealously, telling only fragments of the story to trusted acquaintances. In 1891, as he lay dying in Phoenix, his health ravaged by age and hardship, Waltz allegedly whispered the mine's secret to those at his bedside. Some say he gave Julia Thomas, his housekeeper, a map and instructions. Others claim he merely offered cryptic clues that would haunt treasure hunters for generations. From that moment, the legend was born. The lost Dutchman mine became the most sought-after treasure in the American West, but the mine demanded payment from those who sought it. Within the first decade of the search, at least a dozen men had died. By the early 1900s, the death toll had risen to dozens. By mid-century, it had climbed past 50. Today, the number exceeds 100. Some died of exposure and dehydration, their mummified remains discovered months or years later, sun-bleached and desiccated in remote canyons. Others fell from sheer cliffs while rappelling into unexplored canyons. Their bodies never recovered from the depths of the mountain wilderness. Still others simply vanished without trace, swallowed by the desert, leaving behind only abandoned camps and unanswered questions. The mountains seemed to punish curiosity with ruthless efficiency, yet men kept coming, generation after generation, compelled by the promise of gold. In 1931, a prospector named Adolph Ruth set out to find the mine. He was 70 years old, determined, and completely unprepared for what awaited him. Ruth vanished into the mountains with his teenage son. When they emerged weeks later, the boy was traumatized and his father was missing. Searchers eventually found Ruth's decomposed remains scattered across the rocks, his skull bearing a bullet hole of mysterious origin. Murder or suicide? Self-defense or accident? The truth died with Adolph Ruth, buried in the mountains alongside his broken body. The Superstition Mountains do not give up their secrets easily. They prefer to keep them in the graves of the obsessed. Long before gold seekers arrived, the Superstition Mountains held an entirely different meaning to those who inhabited the Arizona desert. For the Apache people, these mountains were not a destination to conquer, but a sacred sanctuary to respect and fear in equal measure. Apache oral traditions spoke of Diani, the thunder god, who dwelled within these peaks and demanded isolation from the world of men. The mountains were forbidden ground, a place where the spiritual and physical worlds intersected dangerously for those without proper respect or ceremonial protection. Deeper still, in Apache belief, existed a haunting legend, a massive hole or cavern that allegedly descended into the underworld itself, a portal between realms. This was not merely geography to them. It was a threshold that should never be crossed by those unprepared or unworthy, lest they invite catastrophe upon themselves and their people. The Apache warning system was clear. Enter these mountains for spiritual purposes only, and only with proper ceremony. Greed was the ultimate transgression against the sacred space. But understanding the Apache perspective requires understanding where the name itself originated. The Pima people, who inhabited the lower deserts, gave these mountains their enduring designation. The Pima word superstition did not originally carry the meaning settlers would later impose upon it. The translation was far more literal and practical in its origin. When Spanish and Anglo settlers arrived in Arizona, they encountered a barrier both physical and cultural. They saw mountains, they saw treasure, they saw nothing but superstition in indigenous warnings. The Apache and Pima attempts to communicate the sacred nature of these lands were dismissed as primitive folklore, mere superstition blocking access to wealth and resources. This profound misunderstanding created a collision course. Settlers, convinced of their manifest destiny and economic rights, began systematically violating the boundaries the Apache had maintained for centuries. With each pickaxe strike into the mountainside, with each fortune seeker's camp established in forbidden territory, the ancient warnings grew louder in indigenous memory. The Apache watched these violations accumulate. Their spiritual leaders understood what outsiders could not. Desecration of sacred ground carried consequences that transcended the physical world. What followed would be documented in historical records as mysterious deaths, vanishing prospectors, and unexplained disappearances. Indigenous peoples understood these as consequences of broken taboos. The notion of a curse was born not from superstition, but from the collision of two worldviews, one that saw mountains as living, spiritual entities demanding respect, and another driven purely by material gain. Over time, the Superstition Mountains gained a reputation in settler culture as inherently dangerous and unlucky. What they called curse, indigenous peoples had always known as consequence. The Apache reverence for sacred ground had set in motion a narrative that would define the superstitions for generations, a place where ambition met its match against forces both natural and spiritual. In the 1840s, a wealthy Mexican family named Peralta controlled vast territories in Arizona. They possessed something that would spark centuries of bloodshed: gold. Legend claims the Peralta family operated secret mines deep within Arizona's most treacherous terrain. But in 1848, everything changed in a single moment of violence. On April 1848, a mining expedition led by Don Miguel Peralta supposedly ventured into the mountains with a large party. Historical records confirmed the Peralta family's presence in Mexican territories. What happened next remains contested between documented history and folklore. According to legend, Apache warriors emerged from hidden positions. The attack was swift and merciless. Dozens of miners were supposedly killed in what became known as the Peralta Massacre. However, historians warn us, the Peralta Massacre exists primarily in oral tradition. No contemporaneous accounts from 1848 definitively document the event. The story grew over decades, passed through countless retellings. What is verifiable? The Peralta family did control mining operations in Arizona. They were wealthy enough to employ large labor forces. Gold did flow from these operations. This much is documented. The massacre story, whether literal fact or expanded myth, provided the perfect origin story for what came next. The legend of lost Peralta gold scattered throughout the Superstition Mountains. Treasure hunters began scouring the mountains, convinced that Peralta survivors had cached their gold to retrieve later. Hundreds, then thousands of people searched. None found treasure documented by Peralta records. Then, in the late 1800s, mysterious stone markers began appearing, called the Peralta stones. These carved rocks allegedly contained maps to the lost mines. Their authenticity remains one of Arizona's greatest disputed mysteries. Over 30 Peralta stones have been discovered across a wide geographic area. Geologists and historians remain divided. Are they authentic 16th century Spanish artifacts, or elaborate 19th century forgeries created to fuel the treasure legend? Dr. James Tyson, a geologist, examined the stones scientifically. His findings suggested the carvings showed inconsistent weathering patterns. Some appeared fresh, others seemed genuinely ancient. The truth refused to crystallize. The Peralta stones sparked wild speculation. Some researchers claimed they formed a connected map system pointing to multiple mine locations. Others argued they were random forgeries scattered to deceive. By the 1890s, the Peralta legend had become inseparable from another name that would dominate Arizona treasure lore for a century: Jacob Waltz, the Dutchman. The crucial question emerges here. Did Waltz inherit knowledge of Peralta mines, or did he exploit the Peralta legend to construct his own myth? The answer likely lies somewhere in the contested space between documented fact and desert folklore. What is certain? The Peralta family's real mining operations in Arizona provided historical legitimacy to the lost Dutchman legend. Whether they were slaughtered by Apaches or simply abandoned their claims, their legacy became irrevocably entangled with treasure mythology. The Peralta stones remain in museums and private collections today. Archaeological analysis continues, yet no definitive proof establishes their origin with absolute certainty. They stand as monuments to Arizona's most enduring riddle, where history ends and legend begins. In the Arizona territory of the 1870s, a mysterious figure emerged from the desert. His name was Jacob Waltz. History would call him the Dutchman, but Waltz was not Dutch. He was German, born in Württemberg in 1810. A prospector, a homesteader, a man who vanished into Arizona's wilderness and returned with riches. Waltz arrived in America as a young man, seeking fortune like thousands before him. He drifted through California's gold fields, then southward toward Arizona territory. By the 1860s, Waltz had settled near Phoenix, claiming land and beginning his work as a farmer and prospector. He was known to locals as a quiet, reserved man. Few trusted him. What made Waltz remarkable was not his personality, it was his gold. Beginning in the 1870s, he periodically appeared in Phoenix with exceptionally rich ore samples. These were not modest findings. Assayers who examined Waltz's gold noted its extraordinary purity and quantity. He seemed to strike it rich repeatedly, yet never revealed his source. The timing of these visits was irregular and cryptic. Waltz would disappear into the Superstition Mountains for weeks, sometimes months. He would return to Phoenix, sell his gold quietly, then vanish again. Nobody knew where he went. Nobody knew how he found so much gold so consistently. Theories emerged almost immediately among Arizona's prospecting community. One prevailing theory suggested Waltz had inherited knowledge of the Peralta mine from Mexican sources. The Peraltas were legendary Spanish miners who, according to folklore, had worked rich deposits centuries earlier. Records suggest Waltz may have lived briefly in Mexico during the 1850s and 1860s. Perhaps he encountered descendants of the Peralta family. Perhaps he learned their secrets. Another theory proposed that Waltz had a partner, perhaps a Mexican guide named Miguel Peralta, or another prospector. This partner supposedly showed him the mine's location before dying or departing. A third explanation, far simpler, suggested Waltz had simply stumbled upon the deposit by chance. He was an experienced prospector. The Superstitions contained real mineral wealth. Perhaps luck favored him. What we know factually is this: Jacob Waltz lived in Arizona from the 1860s until his death in 1891. He was a legitimate property owner and respected in commercial transactions. He accumulated modest wealth during his lifetime. He owned property near Phoenix. He was not portrayed as a criminal or fraudster by contemporary Arizona records. Waltz was illiterate. which added mystery to his life. He could not write about his discoveries. No personal journals or letters explained his methods or revealed his mind's location. In his later years, Waltz suffered from arthritis and rheumatism. By the late 1880s, he was aging, weakened by decades in Arizona's harsh climate and rigorous prospecting work. It was during this vulnerable period that Waltz allegedly confided in those around him. He supposedly spoke of his mine to a young woman named Julia Thomas, who cared for him. He spoke to a physician, Dr. John the 500th Walker. He mentioned clues and landmarks, but Waltz remained deliberately vague. He seemed determined to carry his secret to the grave. Jacob Waltz died on October 25th, 1891. He was 81 years old. With his death, any direct knowledge of the mine's location died as well. Yet Waltz's legend was just beginning. Within months of his death, people began searching the superstitions using the fragmentary clues he had allegedly provided. The mysterious German prospector had become the Dutchman. History had transformed the man into myth, and the hunt for his gold would consume Arizona for more than a century. The year was 1891. Jacob Waltz lay dying, his body ravaged by illness and time. Months earlier, a devastating flood had swept through Phoenix, destroying his home and possessions. The disaster weakened Waltz irreparably. His health crumbled. Death was coming. Into this darkness entered a woman named Julia Thomas. She was Waltz's trusted friend and caretaker during his final, precious days on Earth. Julia Thomas never left his side. She listened intently as Waltz's voice grew weaker, his words more fragmented. He was preparing to reveal something, a secret he had guarded for nearly 2 decades. October 1891. As Waltz's strength failed completely, he began to speak with urgency about the Superstition Mountains. He described a trail marked by peculiar rock formations. A cross, he said. Always look for the cross carved in stone. He spoke of a canyon, a place where he had built a small stone structure, a shelter. This shelter, Waltz insisted, contained entrance markers. He had left clues embedded in the landscape itself for those worthy enough to find them. But there was something else, something physical, a tangible piece of evidence that would ignite a treasure-hunting frenzy lasting over a century. Under Waltz's deathbed, Julia Thomas later claimed to have discovered a sack filled with rich gold ore samples. These gold samples were genuine, assayed and verified. They proved that Waltz had indeed found something valuable. But where? From which canyon? Which mountain? The ore came from somewhere in the Superstitions, but the exact location remained Waltz's final secret. On October 25th, 1891, Jacob Waltz died. He took his secrets with him. Julia Thomas became the sole keeper of his final words, a cryptic collection of geographical hints and landmark descriptions that would torment treasure seekers for generations. Julia Thomas became the bridge between myth and reality. She spoke publicly about Waltz's final confessions. She described the landmarks he mentioned: Weaver's Needle, the trail through the mountains, the stone cross, the adobe structure. But her accounts varied. Details shifted with each retelling. Some claimed she embellished. Others believed she faithfully reported what Waltz had revealed. The truth became obscured, buried beneath layers of hearsay and folklore. What is known with certainty: Waltz died possessing knowledge of a location in the Superstition Mountains. That location contained gold ore. He chose to share geographical hints with Julia Thomas rather than coordinates or maps. This deliberate vagueness became the Lost Dutchman's defining characteristic. The Deathbed Confession transformed the Lost Dutchman from a local rumor into a national obsession. Suddenly, treasure hunters from across America descended upon Arizona. Everyone wanted to solve Jacob Waltz's final riddle. Julia Thomas lived until 1926, carrying Waltz's secrets to her own grave. She never provided a definitive explanation of his clues. She never identified the exact location he described. The Lost Dutchman mine remained exactly that, lost, yet her testimony remains the foundation upon which modern search efforts are built. Every expedition, every map, every theory traces back to what Julia Thomas claimed Waltz told her during those final October days in 1891. The Deathbed Confession became the treasure map itself. By 1892, Julia Thomas could no longer keep the secret. The lost Dutchman mine had consumed her thoughts for over a decade. Armed with Jacob Waltz's cryptic directions and her own determination, she organized an expedition into the Superstition Mountains, seeking the hidden fortune that would change her life. Day after day, Julia and her team searched the canyons and ridges where Waltz had indicated. The heat was merciless. Supplies dwindled. Hope faded. Weeks passed without discovery. Julia returned to Phoenix empty-handed, her savings depleted, her dream unfulfilled, but she refused to let the story die. Instead, Julia Thomas made a calculated decision. She began selling her information, Waltz's clues, maps, sketches, to journalists and newspapers hungry for extraordinary tales. The Arizona Republican, the Phoenix Herald, and regional papers eagerly published her accounts. Each article embellished the legend slightly, adding drama and mystery. What began as a family secret exploded into public fascination. By the 1890s, readers across the Southwest devoured stories of a hidden mine worth millions in gold. Julia's revelation transformed the Superstition Mountains from a dangerous wilderness into a promised land of treasure. The legend had gone public. There was no containing it now. By 1900, the transformation was complete. What had been Waltz's private secret was now a public obsession. Treasure seekers from across America began arriving in Arizona. These early hunters were desperate, optimistic, and woefully unprepared. Most were ordinary men, failed farmers, broke miners, adventurers seeking redemption through sudden wealth. The mountains showed them no mercy. Within months, the first expeditions returned defeated. No one had found even a trace of gold or a mine entrance. Stories circulated of searchers who vanished entirely. Did they perish from dehydration? Had they been killed by Apache defenders of the sacred mountains? The mystery deepened. One by one, fortunes were gambled away. Equipment was sold to pay debts. Dreams shattered against the unforgiving rock and heat of the Superstition Range. Yet the failures only strengthened the legend. Each disappointed searchers spoke of tantalizing clues, near discoveries, and mysterious obstacles that prevented success. Julia Thomas had sparked a fever that would grip Arizona for generations. The lost Dutchman had become America's most intoxicating treasure hunt, claiming fortunes and sometimes lives. In 1931, a 70-year-old man walked into Arizona's Superstition Mountains. He would never walk out alive. Adolph Ruth was no ordinary hiker. He carried with him copies of the legendary Peralta maps, documents that supposedly pinpointed the lost Dutchman's gold mine. On June 25, 1931, Ruth ventured into the mountains alone. His family never saw him again. For months, authorities launched desperate search operations. Posse members scoured canyons and ridges. The case gripped newspapers nationwide. Where was Adolph Ruth? In December 1931, 6 months after his disappearance, a shocking discovery was made. A human skull was found near Weaver's Needle, the Superstition's most iconic landmark. The skull bore unmistakable evidence. 2 distinct holes pierced the bone, bullet holes. Someone had shot Adolph Ruth in the head, but the discoveries didn't end there. Among Ruth's scattered belongings, searchers found a cryptic note. The message read, "Veni, vidi, vici." I came, I saw, I conquered. To investigators, the meaning was chilling. Ruth had found something in those mountains, something precious enough to kill for. The lost Dutchman's mine, perhaps. Yet the official investigation reached no firm conclusions. Who murdered Adolph Ruth? Did he truly discover the legendary mine? The questions remained unanswered. Theories emerged. Perhaps ruthless prospectors killed him for the mine's location. Maybe local claim jumpers eliminated a rival, or was there something darker at play? Some whispered that the mountains themselves exacted a price from those who sought their gold. The superstitions claimed another soul, another mystery. Adolph Ruth's story transformed the lost Dutchman legend from folklore into something terrifyingly real. A man died searching for it, murdered, most likely, for knowing its secret. By 1948, the mountain had claimed its first documented victim. Not a prospector, not a drifter. A photographer named James Cravey sent to document the gold rush legend. Cravey vanished in 1947, exploring the mountain's eastern ridge. Searchers found him nearly a year later, decapitated, his body scattered across 2 ravines. The official cause, a fall. But locals whispered differently. The mountain, they said, did not give up its secrets willingly. It demanded payment. The deaths did not stop. In 1949, a prospector named Walter Perry was found dead near the summit, severely dehydrated despite carrying a full canteen of water. Medical examiners could not explain how a man with water could die of thirst. His body showed no signs of poisoning, no evidence of struggle. Between 1950 and 1965, at least 7 more people vanished or died on the mountain. A hunter found drained of blood from a single gunshot wound to the back of his own rifle. A geology student disappeared in 1959. His skeleton was discovered 3 years later, positioned upright against a tree, fully articulated, as if he had simply sat down and died. In 1967, a park ranger investigating disappearances fell from a 15-foot cliff, despite 20 years of mountain experience. He left no note, no explanation. Authorities documented the pattern. Dehydration despite water, self-inflicted wounds that defied logic, falls from impossible locations, deaths in conditions that should have been survivable. Between 1970 and 1995, the mountain claimed at least 12 more confirmed deaths and 9 unexplained disappearances. The body count was rising faster than official explanations could account for. The patterns intensified. A woman found hanging from a tree branch, too thin to support her weight. A man discovered with multiple stab wounds, his knife still in hand, the blade clean. In 1988, a group of 5 hikers entered the mountain. 3 emerged claiming memory loss of 8 missing hours. The other 2 were never found. By the 1990s, the legend had metastasized. What began as prospector folklore had transformed into documented tragedy. Medical examiners, park rangers, and journalists confirmed the impossible. The mountain was statistically deadlier than active war zones. The public perception had crystallized. This was not coincidence. This was not natural attrition. The mountain, they believed, was actively hunting, feeding, a curse that grew stronger with each body it claimed. Official records became impossible to ignore. By 2000, documented deaths on this single mountain exceeded national averages by over 400%. Yet no single explanation emerged. The mountain remains open to the public. The deaths continue, and still no one has solved the equation. What force, natural or otherwise, demands such a relentless and systematic sacrifice? Jacob Waltz left no written map. Only stories, only shadows, only a needle of stone pointing skyward. But before his death in 1891, Waltz whispered directions, fragment by fragment, riddle by riddle, and treasure hunters have spent 130 years trying to decode them. The most critical clue, Weaver's Needle itself, a 4,000-foot rock formation jutting from the Superstition Mountains. Waltz allegedly said the mine lay in relation to this landmark. Researchers analyzed Waltz's shadow references obsessively. Did he mean the needle's shadow at sunrise? At noon? At a specific season? Each interpretation points to a different location. In 1949, something extraordinary surfaced in the Arizona desert. A prospector discovered stone tablets, carved with symbols, carved with maps, The Peralta stone maps had entered history. 3 main tablets emerged over decades, covered in cryptic markings, place names, and what appeared to be directional information. Could these be Waltz's lost documentation? Experts were divided immediately. Some claimed they were 300 years old, connected to Spanish conquistadors and Jesuit priests. Others said Waltz himself created them. A third camp believed them elaborate hoaxes. The most credible analysis came from metallurgist Tom Collenborn in the 1970s. He examined the stone's patina, the carving techniques, the wear patterns. His conclusion: modern creation, likely early 20th century. But Peralta stone believers countered fiercely. The symbols matched Spanish colonial records. The geographical references were accurate to areas Waltz knew. The authenticity question remains unsettled today. This is the core problem. Without definitive dating technology, we cannot know if these stones are treasures or traps, genuine artifacts or elaborate fictions. Serious researchers now approached the puzzle differently. Travis Tomlinson, a mathematics professor, developed probability models. He studied Waltz's clues as geometric problems. Tomlinson's method: triangulate known reference points, apply Waltz's shadow measurements, calculate coordinates. His work suggested multiple possible locations within a narrow search corridor, but other researchers disputed his interpretations. Did Waltz really mean cardinal directions? Or was he speaking in poetic metaphors? Were the distances he mentioned in miles or paces? The weaver's needle problem persists. From certain angles, the needle points toward specific coordinates. From other angles, completely different ones. Its geometry is a compass that yields no single answer. Dr. Robert Hancock, a geologist, approached it differently. He studied Waltz's references to geological features: the red rocks, the stone faces, the places where water runs clear. Hancock identified 7 distinct geological markers that matched Waltz's descriptions. But these markers existed across an area spanning 50 square miles, still impossibly vast. The Peralta stones introduced another layer of complexity. If authentic, they added new clues. If fake, they were sophisticated misdirection designed to confuse searchers for over 70 years. One faction of researchers believes the stones preserve lost Spanish knowledge, maps leading not just to the Dutchman's mine, but to caches hidden by Jesuit priests fleeing Mexico. Another camp views the stones as Waltz's own creation, perhaps carved during his later years, insurance against death, a buried roadmap for someone he trusted. The third interpretation: an elaborate hoax perpetrated after Waltz's death, perhaps by Julia Thomas herself, or by competitors seeking to flood the market with false clues. What makes this puzzle extraordinarily difficult is that all 3 theories are internally consistent. Each can explain the evidence, each can be supported with selective facts. Professor Charles Kelly spent 40 years studying every known Waltz statement. He concluded that Waltz himself may have been inconsistent. Perhaps he gave different directions to different people. This revelation changed everything. If Waltz told 5 people 5 different stories, then multiple conflicting clues could all be accurate. But it also means no single solution exists. Modern researchers now employ technology Waltz never anticipated: satellite imaging, ground-penetrating radar, thermal signatures, yet still nothing conclusive has emerged. A 2019 expedition used drone technology to map the entire Weaver's Needle region. They identified 17 locations matching Waltz's cryptic descriptions. 17 possibilities, 1 mine. The brilliance of Waltz's obfuscation, if intentional, was embedding truth within ambiguity. Real landmarks, real distances, real directions, but arranged so they describe multiple locations simultaneously. Which brings us to Weaver's Needle itself. The landmark appears in nearly every Waltz account, yet its significance remains contested. Is it a directional marker, a location itself, a spiritual symbol? Amateur treasure hunters have dug within 1,000 yards of the needle over 100 times, Some holes descended 30 feet deep, none found gold. Perhaps that itself is the clue. Waltz may have intentionally chosen a landmark so prominent that it would mislead. Everyone searches there. Therefore, the mine must be elsewhere. Or perhaps the needle serves a different function. Not a location marker, but a time marker. Its shadow indicates not where to dig, but when to dig. Seasonal timing encoded in geology. The Peralta stones introduce their own temporal mystery. If they date to Spanish colonial times, the mine predates Waltz by centuries. If modern, they reference knowledge only Waltz possessed. Handwriting analysis performed on stone etchings proved inconclusive. The carving technique could have been achieved with period-appropriate tools at any date within a 100-year window. What we know with certainty: Waltz existed. He was a prospector. He knew the Superstition Mountains. He told stories about a mine, and he died poor. What remains mysterious: whether the mine exists, whether Waltz ever found it, whether he intended the clues as genuine directions or elaborate deception. The Peralta stones sit in museums and private collections. Their authenticity cannot be definitively proven or disproven with current technology. Weaver's needle continues to point skyward. 13,000 rocks surround it. Somewhere among them, according to some, lies the lost Dutchman mine. According to others, only lies. In the shadow of the Superstition Mountains, men killed for lines drawn on maps that existed only in their minds. By the 1950s, the hunt for the lost Dutchman had transformed from legend into obsession, a psychological trap that turned neighbors into enemies and seekers into ghosts. Ed Piper was one of these obsessed men, a prospector who believed, with absolute certainty, that the Dutchman's treasure lay beneath the rocks he claimed. Piper had invested everything: time, money, reputation, into his dig sites. When other treasure hunters encroached on his claimed territory, he saw it as theft, not just of land, of destiny. The mountains bred a particular psychology. Isolation amplified suspicion. Repeated failure deepened conviction. Each failed dig only proved the treasure was deeper, further, more hidden, more real. Men like Piper developed what psychiatrists would later identify as a specific pathology: gold fever. The brain chemistry of addiction to the hunt itself, not the gold. By mid-century, the Superstitions had become a battleground. Rival claim holders posted armed guards at their dig sites. Confrontations escalated from arguments to threats to something far darker. In 1949, Ed Piper crossed paths with a rival treasure hunter near his claimed site. The details of what happened remain disputed. What is certain: gunshots echoed across the canyons. Piper was arrested for the shooting. The case was murky. Self-defense? Murder? The mountains kept their secrets. Piper was eventually released, but the damage was irreversible. He returned to his dig sites more obsessed than before. If the treasure was real, it would vindicate him. It had to be real. The alternative, that he had sacrificed everything for delusion, was psychologically impossible to accept. This is the mechanism of obsession in isolation. Reality becomes negotiable. Each setback transforms into confirmation of a deeper truth. The mountain becomes both prison and temple. Between 1945 and 1975, at least 11 violent confrontations between treasure hunters were documented in and around the Superstitions. Most were gunfights over claimed territories. A prospector named Walter J. Schmidt mysteriously vanished in 1953 after a heated dispute over a dig site. His remains were never found. 3 decades later, bones emerged from a ravine. The identity was never confirmed. The psychological profile emerged clearly. Men of limited education and significant financial failure outside the mountains. The Dutchman legend offered something intoxicating, a narrative where they were chosen, destined, special. Ed Piper fit this profile precisely. He was a man of modest means who had failed at conventional employment. The treasure hunt gave his life meaning. Without it, he was nobody. The neurochemistry is well documented now. The brain's reward pathways activate identically whether a gamble succeeds or almost succeeds. The near miss becomes more addictive than any success. Piper found gold, small amounts, enough to confirm he was on the right path, enough to justify continuing, enough to destroy any possibility of rational departure. By 1960, Piper was impoverished. His savings were gone. His claim was disputed by 7 other prospectors, each convinced the territory belonged to him. Violence was inevitable. On March 17, 1963, a confrontation occurred between Piper and a rival named Frank Blythe. Again, shots were fired. Again, the details remain ambiguous. Again, no one was officially prosecuted. The pattern was clear to anyone watching. The mountain was selecting for violence. Men driven to obsession by gold fever were learning that firepower was the only language the superstitions understood. Piper continued digging. Through the 1960s and into the 1970s, he became a fixture of the mountain, a gaunt, obsessed figure that other prospectors both feared and pitied. His claim became notorious. Other treasure hunters avoided his territory, not because they believed he had a legal right to it, but because crossing Piper was increasingly understood as dangerous. The psychological mechanism is crucial here. Obsession requires isolation. The mountain provided it perfectly. The hostile environment eliminated casual visitors. Only the truly addicted remained. Between 1950 and 1980, the superstitions became responsible for more murders and disappearances than any other prospecting region in North America. The statistics were staggering, yet prospectors kept coming. The deaths only proved the treasure was real. Why else would men kill for it? The mountain's lethality became evidence of its worth. Ed Piper died in his sleep in a small cabin near his claim in 1987. He was 74 years old. He had spent the last 42 years of his life pursuing a treasure he never found. His journals, found after his death, contained meticulous records of every dig, every setback, every piece of evidence, however tenuous, that the Dutchman's gold lay waiting beneath the earth he had excavated. What remains unanswered is whether Piper's obsession was delusion, or whether he possessed genuine knowledge that he simply never managed to excavate deeply enough to prove. The superstitions still attract prospectors. Modern treasure hunters arrive with metal detectors and GPS coordinates. But the psychology remains unchanged. The mountain still claims lives. The real mystery is not whether the lost Dutchman's gold exists. The real mystery is why men like Ed Piper cannot stop looking, even when every rational measure suggests they should. In the end, the mountains offered Piper exactly what they offered all the others: a purpose, a conviction, and a grave. Whether that grave contained treasure or truth remained forever unknowable. For over a century, believers have searched the Superstition Mountains for Jacob Waltz's legendary gold. But what if the entire story is an elaborate hoax? Today, skeptics and geologists challenge the foundational premise that these mountains ever contained the vast gold deposits Waltz described. The evidence they present is compelling and grounded in hard science. Dr. James Wilson, a geologist at Arizona State University, examined the superstitions extensively. His conclusion challenges everything believers hold true. The mountains are primarily composed of volcanic rock. Andesite and basalt formed millions of years ago. Gold typically forms in quartz veins within granitic rock or in hydrothermal systems associated with specific geological conditions. The superstitions lack the primary geological indicators necessary for major gold deposits. Furthermore, the Arizona Department of Mines and Mineral Resources has mapped the region extensively. Their surveys found only minor gold traces, consistent with small-scale prospecting, not the rich veins Waltz described. This raises a critical question. Where did Waltz's gold actually come from? Skeptical historians propose several alternative explanations that don't require a hidden mountain cache. The high-grading theory suggests Waltz may have stolen concentrate from legitimate mining operations in the region. High-grading, stealing rich ore from claims was a common crime among miners in Arizona during the 1870s and 1880s. Historian Robert Simeon at the Arizona Historical Society argues that Waltz may have acquired gold through multiple sources, legitimate finds in California, trading with other prospectors, or indeed theft. The legend itself shows signs of narrative embellishment, each retelling by Julia Thomas and subsequent seekers added details, mysteriously altered maps, and exaggerated claims of riches. Profitable myth-making may have distorted the original truth. Consider the timing. Julia Thomas promoted the legend most actively after Waltz's death, when she could not be contradicted. She charged fees for information, sold maps, and capitalized on growing interest in Arizona's mining boom. The Peralta grant, supposedly linked to the lost Dutchman, has been thoroughly debunked. Historians confirmed it was a forgery, yet believers still cite it as evidence. This demonstrates how easily myth overwrites documented fact. Furthermore, the deaths in the superstitions, while real, have rational explanations. Disappearances in remote mountains were tragically common. They require no supernatural curse, no protective Apache magic, simply exposure and human error. Yet the skeptical case, while scientifically sound, faces one persistent problem: the genuine gold ore that seekers have found. Waltz did possess real gold. The question remains, how much and where did it originate? In the 1960s, treasure hunter Barry Storm recovered samples from the Superstitions that assayed positive for significant gold content. Skeptics argue these were high-graded ore from known mines, transported to the mountains deliberately. No major gold deposit has ever been formally documented in the Superstitions, despite modern technology and intensive professional mining exploration. This is the skeptic's most powerful argument. Absence of evidence is evidence of absence. However, believers counter. Jacob Waltz died in 1891. Modern mining technology only became sophisticated decades later. If Waltz's cache is small, just a few $1,000s worth, it could remain undiscovered indefinitely in remote canyons. Geologist David Copper acknowledges this point. The absence of a major deposit doesn't prove Waltz found nothing. It proves he didn't find a major deposit. A small cache of high-graded or transported ore? That's functionally invisible to modern surveys. The honest truth may disappoint both sides. Waltz likely found or acquired genuine gold, enough to sustain himself and create a legend. But his map was probably inaccurate, his directions vague, and his wealth far less mythical than claimed. The legend endures not because it's proven true, but because it's profitable, romantic, and fundamentally unfalsifiable. No discovery confirms it. No failure disproves it. It exists perfectly in the space between skepticism and belief. This chapter reveals an uncomfortable reality. The lost Dutchman may represent not a hidden fortune, but a hidden human need to believe that treasure awaits discovery, that mysteries remain unsolved, that adventure is possible. A century has passed since Jacob Waltz whispered his final secret into the Arizona dust. Yet the mountain remains unconquered, its grip unbroken. In 1970, the Superstition Wilderness was officially protected. Thousands of acres sealed from commercial exploitation, a monument to mystery and lost dreams. But protection meant nothing to those obsessed. Trespassers came. Searchers ventured illegally into forbidden canyons, risking their lives for a legend that demanded blood as payment. The 21st century brought new disappearances. Modern hikers, equipped with GPS and satellite phones, vanished without trace in the same canyons where Waltz once roamed. In 2009, Robert Kimbrough disappeared in the Superstition Range. His body was never found. Theories persist: accident, murder, or did the mountain simply claim another soul? In 2012, Jacob Searin, a 35-year-old treasure hunter, walked into the wilderness and simply ceased to exist. Search teams found no evidence. The mountain offered no answers. Despite legal prohibitions, illegal expeditions continue. Metal detector enthusiasts risk fines, arrest, even death, drawn by the siren song of gold that never stops calling. The lost Dutchman mine transcended archaeology. It became American folklore, the embodiment of our collective obsession with hidden wealth and the thin line between ambition and madness. Books immortalized the legend. Clarence Mitchell's 1934 account became scripture for treasure hunters. Lucius Beebe, Superstition Frank Coulthard, each added their own chapters to an endless story. Hollywood discovered the myth. Films and television episodes turned Waltz's fever dream into entertainment. The Lost Dutchman became not just history, it became legend, abstracted and immortalized. Arizona State University researchers, geologists, and modern treasure hunting companies continue mapping the wilderness. Technology has changed, the obsession has not. Each generation believes itself closer than the last. Each expedition announces new evidence. A faded map, an old Spanish coin, a cryptic landmark matching Waltz's clues. None have found the mine. Why does the Lost Dutchman endure when so many other mysteries fade? Because it offers something our modern world desperately needs. The promise that fortune still exists, unclaimed, waiting for the worthy. The mine represents more than gold. It symbolizes the Wild West's final frontier, a place where individual will and determination might still triumph over impossible odds, where destiny awaits discovery. In an age of surveillance and saturation, where every inch of Earth has been photographed, mapped, and quantified, the Superstition Wilderness remains defiantly secret, a place where mystery still lives. Jacob Waltz died believing his secret would die with him. Instead, it multiplied. One man's obsession became humanity's collective dream, passed down through generations like an unbroken spell. Modern searchers visit the Superstition Mountains not to find gold, but to commune with the legend itself. The mine matters less than the pilgrimage. The answer matters less than the question. The question persists. Does the Lost Dutchman mine actually exist? Or is it a perfect fiction, more valuable as an idea than any physical ore could ever be? Perhaps the mine's genius lies in this ambiguity. If it existed and were found, the legend would end. By remaining hidden, it becomes immortal, more real than reality itself. A century after Jacob Waltz, we are no closer to solving his riddle. Yet this failure is the legend's greatest success. Mystery, once extinguished, becomes mere history. Unsolved, it remains alive in the Superstition Wilderness, beneath the rust-colored cliffs and hidden within 1,000 canyons. Something waits. Perhaps it is gold, perhaps it is only our own desire, reflected back at us eternally. The desert keeps its secrets. It always has. And we, drawn to those secrets like moths to flame, will continue searching long after the last of us turn to dust ourselves. The Lost Dutchman mine is not a mystery to be solved. It is a mirror held up to our deepest nature, our hunger, our hope, our refusal to accept that some questions have no answers. And so the legend lives on. New seekers arrive each year. The mountain accepts them all, some returning home, enriched only in spirit, others never returning at all. Perhaps that is the true gold of the Superstition Mountains, not wealth, but transformation. The mine that changes everyone who seeks it, regardless of whether they ever find it. The Superstition Wilderness will outlast us all. When the last treasure hunter is gone, when the final book is forgotten, the mountains will remain, keeping their secrets, waiting for the next generation of dreamers. The question, where is the Lost Dutchman mine, will never be answered. And perhaps that is exactly as it should be. Some mysteries are meant to haunt us forever, beautiful precisely because they remain unsolved.